Hi everyone, Hunter here. So a couple of weeks ago, I finally tackled and read The Count of Monte Cristo. My brother bought this for me maybe 3-4 years ago. It's a large book, a bit daunting, and so I just never got around to it. It's hard to read a 1,250 page book when you have a lot of 200-300 page books on your shelves, and it's just a lot easier to knock out 4 books than one. Anyway, I really wanted to read this book. I remember liking the 2002 movie when I was a kid. I felt like this was one of the classics that I just needed to knock out. I'm proud of myself for finally getting around to it, and honestly, it's totally worth it. It's an amazing book, and I'll go over some of the issues later in the video and my issues with the movie. But I thought this would be fun to compare the book to the most recent movie that came out in 2002. My original plan was to watch all the different Monte Cristos, and then I realized how many movies there actually were, and I wasn't willing to do that. There's like 10 different adaptions. Anyway, we're going to go with the most recent Monte Cristo movie, 2002, and this book. If you don't want the movie spoiled or the book spoiled, you probably shouldn't watch this video. There are a lot of differences, and it's fascinating to see how the screenwriter had to deal with adapting this book to something that's around 2 hours. So this list that I have doesn't even cover all the characters that are in the book that get left out of the movie, but I'm going to go over what I consider basically the main ones. Before I start pronouncing things, I am going to butcher a lot of these pronunciations. I can barely pronounce things in English. If I mess up things in French, I mean, that's a given, right? Edmond Dantes is our main character. Eventually, we will know him as the Count of Monte Cristo. Basically, he's set up essentially like a Mary Sue. He's engaged to the beautiful Mercedes. He has his loving father. He has everything going for him. He gets promoted to captain, and this triggers a series of events where people want revenge on him, and he gets locked up in the chateau. He is in there for years. It's hard for him to keep track of time. He's getting punished. He still doesn't know why or how or any of this, and he's just in there to suffer. Eventually, Edmund hears something from the cell next to him, and this is the same as the movie, or more or less, it's basically aligned. An old man who's trying to escape the prison by digging towards the wall digs essentially into his cell in the book. So there's a lot more like cat and mouse until eventually they run into each other. So the priest and Edmund become very good friends. The priest teaches Edmund multiple languages. He teaches him like philosophy, the history of the world. The movie nails this part. So he is his main instructor that teaches him essentially how to become the Count of Monte Cristo. The big difference here in the movie is that when they tunnel, eventually it collapses and it kills the priest. But in the book, he has a series of strokes. He has like this red potion that he pours in his mouth to give himself life. And by the end, it just doesn't work. But the same general escape plan occurs here. So Edmund swaps out the bodies and then he gets tossed over. The warden does not follow him into the waves. They don't even know Edmund was tossed over until the next day. This doesn't make a lot of sense in the movie because they would probably send people after the warden and they would send people to go look for Edmund. Edmund washes up in the movie on an island that is like not that far from the prison, and you clearly could see someone that was on shore from the prison. A big difference too is that his father does not kill himself after the arrest. His father, Louis, actually fucking starved to death. He's poor and he doesn't have the money to take care of himself, and Mercedes helped him for a little while, but she did what she could, and then his dad starved to death in his apartment. So he didn't hang himself out of shame. He literally rotted away while his son was in prison. And I think that's a disservice in the movie because your dad dying from poverty is much more extreme than just the shame of his son and hanging himself. Now, in the book, this is definitely where it starts to slow down. So like the first 350 pages are pretty good. But then we have this whole section where the Count is in Rome, and it is actually essential for the revenge plot later in the book. In the movie, they almost completely skip over Rome. It's like a 2-3 minute section that happens after Edmund arrives in Paris. The Count arrives in Paris with a large contingent of his people. Maximilian Morel. This is the son of Monsieur Morel, the one that promoted Edmund to captain before his arrest and was trying to get him out of prison and tried to get him justice. So his son has like basically stayed on, but he doesn't know that this is Edmond Dantes. He just thinks it's the Count of Monte Cristo. He has no idea. It's kind of weird and it bothers me a little. He's basically at points like the Scooby-Doo villain where he'll like run off screen like pop, 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 pop. And then he'll come back and he's completely transformed in that, like, now he's wearing a cape and he has a fake mustache and he's like, oh, I'm a priest now. So he does this several times. But the characters he plays are Abbe Busoni, he plays Lord Wilmore, and Sinbad the Sailor. So these are like his 3 alter egos throughout. It gets a bit ridiculous, but you know, it is what it is. Another person that the Count arrives with is his slave, Haiti. Now, slave in that he bought her. It's not really like what you would think like American slavery. I mean, she hangs around, she gets whatever she wants. She's like this beautiful princess, essentially. Her family got betrayed, but the Count saved her. She probably would have been bought as like a sex slave, but he buys her and he never touches her, and she just gets to hang around, and he views her very much as like a father to a daughter in the initial portions of the book. It's only later on when that dynamic starts to change. With him in Paris, we get reintroduced to all the villains. So Fernand Mondego, this is Guy Pearce in the movie. Guy Pearce killed that role. Like, he is the best part of the movie. And honestly, it's perfect casting. As I was reading the book, I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely Guy Pearce, and it's amazing. This character has a huge change. He's kind of like an evil person to Mercedes and his son in the book. He's a loving father and he's a loving husband, and Mercedes loves him quite a bit. And his son loves him so much that he challenges the Count of Monte Cristo to combat because he finds out that the Count has been scheming to basically ruin his father. And so he wants to defend his father. This is about page 950 to 1000 in the book. First 300, 350 really good. And then it's a lot of setup. And then I hit page 950, and the whole time I was like, holy shit, this is so good. I just kept having all these moments. I kept texting my brother like, oh man, this just got so good. This is so good. And it was like 1 a.m. and I was texting. I was like, what? Page 950 to like 1050 in the version of the book I have just absolutely hits. It's like the peak. That's the best it gets. It dips a little after that and it gets good again at the end. But like, that is amazing and it's worth it. It's literally worth reading 950 pages to get to that 100-page section because it's so good. Mercedes basically comes out and tells Edmund, instead of like in the movie where she's like in a carriage and she immediately confronts him and she's like, I know you're Edmund Dantes. In the book, she's kind of like pretty flirty and always like trying to hang around with him and like following him around at parties and always trying to hang out. And Edmund's like avoiding her. In the book, she shows up and she's like, Edmund, please don't kill my son. And so that's the first time as the reader you realize that she knew it was Edmund the whole time. And even Edmund is taken back. So she pleads, please don't kill my son, don't do it. Here is where she finds out all the things that happened to Edmund and like what her husband did, that when she went and got married, he was still rotting away in prison and she married this guy. Yeah. So it's kind of rough. She begs for Edmund's life. Edmund, he's like, agrees. He's like, okay, fine. I'll let your son kill me. We're going to have the duel no matter what tomorrow morning because I agree to it. So your son's going to have to kill me. And then she's like, thank you, Edmund. Thank you for being so selfless. So she goes home and tells Albert everything. So Albert arrives in the morning to the duel, and Albert then apologizes and says, my father and family has done a great wrong to you. Please forgive me, blah, blah, blah. And he leaves and he's like, I have the shame of losing the duel. And he leaves. To Mercedes' credit, this is probably the only good thing I could say about her in the book, saves her son, and then she goes out of the way to make sure he doesn't kill Edmund in a cheap win. Mondego comes home to find that his wife and son are leaving, and the situation is explained to him, and in his shame, he shoots himself. There's no duel in the end where it's like good versus evil. The son is Mondego's. There's no weird pregnancy thing to try to redeem Mercedes. No, Mercedes went and banged her best friend relatively quickly after Edmund got locked up. So Mondego, who loved his wife, loved his son, kills himself in his shame. There's a character, and I do not know how to pronounce his name, but I'm going to say Candaroos. As far as I remember or noticed in the movie, he was not in it. He's one of the people that is there for the initial plotting. He doesn't really partake in it. He's kind of just there, and he's like, this is kind of messed up, guys. But he didn't do anything to stop it, right? And he could have, but he chose not to. He basically ends up being a petty criminal. He murders someone every now and then. Eventually, he gets stabbed to death by his partner, Benedetto. Remember the name Benedetto. This is another character that is not in the movie. Villefort is essentially like the prosecuting attorney, right? He's the one that was like, Edmund, you can go. And then he found out who the letter was supposed to be delivered to. The letter was supposed to be delivered to his father. And because of that, he didn't want to, face the consequences. So in the book, Villefort goes all the way to Paris and he meets with the king and he reveals like the contents of the letter and all this information. In the movie, they don't do any of that. They very much streamline it. But Villefort, he has this whole plot in the book about his family is getting poisoned to death. And the whole time I think you're supposed to be being led on that it's like the Count of Monte Cristo because he's been working with all these like exotic poisons and all these potions. But in fact, it's his insane wife going around at night and like dropping poison into everyone's cups. His dad has been poisoned by her, but he's like still alive. And then his daughter also gets poisoned and then she like dies. So the whole time he's working with a doctor and the doctor's like, we need to tell someone, like someone's murdering people in your house. I know it's murder. He's like, I'm the prosecutor. People can't get murdered in my house. Do you know how bad that'd be for my career? So his whole family gets fucking murdered. So the wife poisons herself and then also poisons their child. And so that's his little boy that he's had with her. Villefort is weeping, right? His whole family's dead. He thinks his daughter's dead. His son just died. His wife died. He had various like other workers for him die. It's all really messed up. The Count actually rushes in and tries to save the boy. I think he's in one of the disguises at this point, but he's not able to save the boy. And this gives him a great amount of grief. And it's almost one of the turning points in the book because he's like, oh my God, did I cause this? Have I gone too far? Am I being too much of a vengeful angel? So to Villefort's credit, he is plugging away. He's like, okay, I still have a job to do. And he's like, I'm going to prosecute Bendito. So Bendito's like on trial and Villefort is like arguing his case in front of everyone. And then Bendito is essentially like, hey, by the way, you're my dad in the courtroom. And then Villefort is just like, what? And the whole crowd's like, what's going on? So there's a whole nother plot in the book about how Villefort like abandoned this fetus that he thought was dead, buried in the backyard. It wasn't dead. Someone dug it up. The kid was pure evil. And in the end, the Count uses the kid, brings him back into Villefort's life to exact his revenge. Villefort just goes crazy. That's essentially the revenge. He's like ashamed and he just goes insane. He doesn't die or anything, but he's just like a crazy man. So you can lock him up in Arkham Asylum. That is a wrap on his character and the revenge arc for him. So the last character he needs to get revenge on is Danglars, and Danglars gets off the easiest. In the movie, Danglars gets like hung from a boat. In the book, Danglars, over like a series of different stock market losses and like companies going bankrupt and just money shifting and opening up fake loans, the Count outsmarts him and basically bankrupts him. Danglars flees with like 5.5 million francs and he flees to Rome, where Luigi Vampa, who is homies with the Count, captures him. So he captures him, he locks him up in the cell, and he's like, hey, you want to eat? And he's like, yeah, I would love to eat. He's like, okay, cool. That's going to be $100,000 for a chicken. And then he's like, I'm not paying those prices. And they're like, okay. And then they take the chicken away. And then he's like, well, I want a piece of bread. And they say, okay. And they bring him a piece of bread. And he's like, how much is that? He's like, they're like, it's $100,000. Everything's $100,000 here. Eventually, over time, every drink costs money, food costs money. He gets down, he doesn't have anything left. And eventually the Count comes in, reveals that, as he does with everyone, that he is Edmond Dantes, and Danglars, pleads, and he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. By this point, because of, the children dying and the Count not being able to save them and seeing all the retribution, basically having his fill of it, he kind of lets Danglars go. Actually, he completely lets Danglars go. He says, you can leave and you can take 50,000 francs with you. I don't actually know how much that is, but from what I can tell in the book, based on how they are like paying people, that seems like at least a year's salary or several years salary. So it's not like he's getting away with nothing. He's actually going to have a pretty good life still. But the Count at this point seems pretty cool with like not, exacting any more revenge. Remember how I said Villefort's daughter gets poisoned to death? Well, her name is Valentine. Well, she's in love with Maximilian Morel. Maximilian Morel is in love with her. When the Count finds out about that, he's pissed. He's like, oh man, okay, I will save her from getting poisoned. She gets poisoned and she dies. As you would expect by reading this book, because the Count just pulls off the impossible on the regular, she basically shows up in like the last 20 pages and Maximilian is going to kill himself, but the Count had told him, give me like 30 days. The Count gets Maximilian high. So he gets Maximilian high, and in this drug phase, when he's like tripping, he brings in Valentine. And then Maximilian's like, oh my God, you are an angel, you deliver. And he's like, you promise you won't kill yourself now? And he's like, no. He's like, okay, well, you're going to have all my money that's left in here. So Maximilian gets away with not only his beautiful fiance, but he gets away with millions of dollars, basically. So before we get into the Count, we need to talk about Mercedes. Mercedes in the movie is a completely redeemed character. So in the movie, the only reason she marries the guy that was hitting on her the whole time, the one that threw Edmond in prison, was because she was pregnant with Edmond's baby. And at this time, that is not going to fly, right? So she moved quickly and she's like, we need to get married. Cool. That is not what happened in the book. In the book, she grieves for maybe a couple years while Mondego is still hitting on her the whole time, right? That's basically the same. Instead of it being like an instant marriage, it takes a couple years. So she marries and bangs the guy that she told Edmond not to worry about. Like, she absolutely did that in the book. It's not even a question. There's like no moral ambiguity about it. She knew this guy liked her. In the openings, he's like keeps hitting on her and she's like, yo, stay back. But he just keeps pursuing. Eventually she gives in. And then she goes, bangs, and has his baby. They go to Paris, and she loves him, and she actually has a pretty decent life. She's completely in love with him. It's not like in the movie where he treats her bad, or she's like this poor girl. No, she loves him. She's rich. She's comfortable, and they love their son, and they have a seemingly pretty good home life, right? It feels much more realistic. Like, that's what happens in real life, right? If your girl moves on, she's not waiting for you to come rescue her. She has her new life. She has her new friends, and everything's working out. But the book is a lot more realistic, and I enjoyed that. If you're a guy, you know this. Like, if your girl has a guy friend, you know the guy guy friend wants to hook up with her. This is generally a universal thing. Girls, if you're watching this video, I've seen a lot of girls, they disagree with that sometimes. Eventually, or when they get drunk, they usually tell me that they know like that's actually what's going down, but they kind of like the attention. They like having that backup option, just having a guy in the friend zone, but they generally know the intentions. Now, that being said, I understand that once in a while there are actual friendships, but we all know what happens if you get drunk. This isn't high school, this isn't college. We know the truth. We know what happens when you have a guy and a girlfriend. Things happen, right? So you say he's just a friend. We have so much great art all about this concept. With everyone else being punished, you're like, is Mercedes going to get any kind of punishment? Does she deserve a punishment? She's like not evil or anything, but she did do something that seems immoral to me. And yeah, they punish her. So after his husband kills himself, they don't have a lot of money. And her son is like, I'm going to go to Africa and I'm going to fight in wars. And if I don't get killed, I will become an officer and I'll take care of us, Mom. And she said, okay. And so they went back to her hometown. The Count of Monte Cristo instructed her to dig up Edmund's little life savings that he had saved up for them to get married. And they live off that for a little bit. Her son takes off to Africa and they have a little reunion scene towards the end of the book. And you're like, oh, this is where they're going to get back together. But no, that's not what they do. And this was really good writing. Instead, there's this energy between them, which is very much like, I loved you at one point. It's like if you saw your ex, right? But you broke up and then you see them years later, right? You still want good things for that person. You still want the best for them. That energy, that connection you have it's gone. It just isn't there anymore. You've both lived a different life. You're not the same people. The person that loved that person, those people don't exist anymore in that way. This is just the reality of things. And I think this is just exceptional writing here because it rings so true. Mercedes apologizes to him. She apologized to Edmund. She says this is her punishment for not waiting for him and for basically hooking up with her friend. And Edmund is not displaying like any kind of like affection to her beyond like just general affection. Like, I wish you well. Basically, she goes off about how like physically she's just not there anymore. Emotionally, she's not there anymore. And Edmund's essentially like, yeah. And she's like, you go on and find someone new, find someone younger and beautiful and go and have the life you deserve, right? This is why this book is super based. He has that person. Kind of weird because it's his slave, but she is a princess that he saved. So when they're back on Monte Cristo, this is basically after he drugged his friend. He goes off with Haiti and him and Haiti basically establish that they love each other. Haiti is like the most beautiful woman in the world. She's like exotic and everyone that sees her is like, oh my God, she's just glowing, right? Just this princess. I think she's pretty young in the book. She's like 20, 21. So essentially the Count of Monte Cristo ends up sailing away with his new young bride. And Maximilian and Valentine are on the island and they're like, are we ever going to see him again? And then Maximilian's like, I hope we do. And I'm sure the Count will not disappoint us. And he sails away on his journey, quite a bit different from the movie where you have this big fight scene at the end. You know, I understand the screenplay and I thought they made a lot of intelligent decisions. You only have 2 hours to do this stuff, but it's tough, man, to adapt these kinds of books. You have to cut out characters. I left out a bunch of characters in this general summary. But, you know, it's interesting to see how these writers have to adapt and do these things. There's a new movie coming out and there's also going to be a miniseries, I believe. I think a miniseries is the only way to adapt this. You know, 10 hours. You could get this done in 10 hours. I think that would be pretty realistic and I think it would be good. Essentially like Shogun, it would be a nice tight season and I think it would be perfect. And I hope, I didn't look into it, but I really hope that the miniseries is in French. If you haven't read The Count of Monte Cristo, I would definitely encourage that you do. I did about 50 pages a day to get through it. When you're in sections that are really good, you might do 100, 150, but the 50 pages a day, trust me, you're going to want to do that when you hit like the Rome section because that can be pretty painful to get through. At one point, they tell a story within a story, and I think it's like 60 or 70 pages, and it has nothing to do with literally anything. You got to remember, at the time, I believe he was writing this in newspapers, right? So you were paid by word. And so this book was essentially encouraged to be stuffed with useless stuff. This book, if you were to edit it down, I think, honestly, here, that seems about right to me. You can cut this much of the book out and it would be just as good. When you hear people online saying things like, oh, they would never publish this book now. Well, why wouldn't they publish this book now, right? Is it some giant conspiracy in the publishing industry to be like, oh, I don't want this awesome book. I don't want this under my name. I don't want this put under my imprint. Is it because your book needs to be edited or your book's not up to snuff, right? I think that this book would still be published today, but not in this form. And I don't think that's a bad thing, right? I enjoyed the movie quite a bit, and I can see why I liked it so much as a kid, and I think it still holds up. If you're too lazy or, you just don't want to put in the time to read The Count of Monte Cristo, just watch the movie. You'll get the general idea. With this summary plus the movie, yeah, you got the story. So yeah, that's it, everyone. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Hunter. I work on TV shows, and I'm a writer, not a TV writer. I'm trying to get there, but we're working. But I am a writer, and I just started my Substack, so I would love if you signed up. That's it. That's all I got. Peace.